It is hard to believe it's been 4 years since we first reported on a first-of-its-kind initiative that launched in Rochester with much political fanfare. The Rochester Monroe Anti-Poverty Initiative, or RMAPI, which is backed by the governor's office, promised to reduce poverty by 50% in 15 years. WXXI's Veronica Volk recently dug into the initiative to find out if the promises initially made are being kept and to learn what's changed since that major announcement in 2015. I recently sat down with Veronica to discuss her findings, and you can take a look. Veronica, there have been questions in our community in regards to the Rochester Monroe Anti-Poverty Initiative about is this initiative working? Is it working fast enough? And B, how transparent has it been? Has it been communicating with the community in terms of its efforts? And I'm curious as to whether those two factors at all tied into your decision to pursue this story in more depth.
Absolutely, it was those two factors. I mean, I covered the announcement of the original Rochester Monroe Anti-Poverty Initiative 4 years ago, and I think, like a lot of people in the media, I was struck by their initial promise of reducing poverty by 50% in 15 years. So I figured it's been 4 years, let's check in, let's see what they've done, and let's see if they're any more towards that goal. Well, we also got a poverty report in September of last year that showed that poverty has actually been increasing in the city. It's a very small increase, but I was wondering how this, new announcement had affected their overall plan and whether or not they were still on track to make that original goal. So that's what I was looking to find out.
So right now, based on that report, we are the third poorest metropolitan area in the country. Mm-hmm. So based on that, this goal, which was by 2025, we were going to reduce poverty by 50%. Is that still the major focus, or has that changed slightly?
Well, when I spoke with Leonard Brock, he said we should not lose sight of that goal, we being a city. He's not just talking about the Anti-Poverty Initiative, he's talking about city government, nonprofit, state government. And he said he called it an aspirational goal. But in that way, I think he was also kind of distancing the initiative from that as a benchmark that was actually going to determine whether or not they were being successful in reducing poverty at all. So in calling it an aspirational goal, he said we shouldn't lose sight of the overall picture that we want to reduce poverty, but we also shouldn't hold ourselves to that very specific standard, because it would be something that has never been done before in a city like Rochester. And what he said was, any kind of progress would be a good step in the right direction. But at this point, it's hard to know what progress would be considered successful. Is it any reduction in poverty whatsoever? Mm-hmm. Or is there any sort of benchmark that we can look at and say, the poverty initiative is working? And so far, it doesn't seem like we have an answer to that.
So let me ask you this. So based on what you just said, you're thinking that, or based on your reporting so far, there are no specific benchmarks that they're aiming towards, just aspirational goals? Or are there specific things that they're trying to target?
Well, I know that from my conversations with Leonard Brock, he said that he's looking more at a city like Hartford, Connecticut, where they were able to reduce poverty by 10% in the same time frame. So 10% is not 50%, of course, but it would still be a really dramatic shift. And I think that he himself is looking at like more that 10% goal than a 50% goal, but they have not set a specific goal for themselves. And I think in a big way it's because they don't want to set unreasonable expectations again, like they might have been doing back in 2015.
Okay. In terms of misunderstandings that you discovered in your reporting, what are those misunderstandings in relation to this initiative?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that, because I walked into this project with some serious misunderstandings. I think, like a lot of people in the community, and that has to do with their, lack of kind of specific messaging with this poverty initiative. What is it? A lot of people think it's to provide direct services. It's not. A lot of people think it's a funder. It's not. A lot of people think it's an agency. It's not. And what they describe themselves as is sort of this coordinator between all the institutions in Rochester and Monroe County that are supposed to be working towards any sort of poverty reduction, but also job creation, development. So they see themselves as kind of a liaison between these organizations and making sure that everybody's on track and everybody's kind of working towards the same goal of poverty reduction.
You reported on this early on with the initiative. They broke into groups to address what are the issues that we're dealing with,
that's right,
and how can we resolve some of these issues. When for Need to Know, we did a poverty simulation a few years ago, and after the simulation, I interviewed someone from Syracuse who said, and she's involved in anti-poverty work there, she said, If, in so many words, if we're going to have change, you have got to have people at the table who live in poverty, are dealing with this every day, and are able to add to the discussion and also talk about some things to bring change. Is that effectively happening? Did that effectively happen with this initiative?
I think that was one of the big pillars behind our MAPI in the beginning, was this idea that we're going to include people who live in poverty in the conversation. We're going to set our goals based on what people need and what people who are working through the system say their problems are. So in the beginning, there was a lot of that. They broke out into work groups where they were working towards recommendations to solve problems in housing and transportation, in job creation and public safety. They also did, one-on-one interviews with people in the community. They did surveys. But right now, it's kind of unclear where all that information went. I spoke with one woman who was in a working group. She was a member of the community. She came from poverty. She worked towards a lot of recommendations in the area of housing that she never saw come to fruition. So you have to wonder whether or not those recommendations have actually been informing some of the work that our MAPI does.
So is there a communication issue? I'm sorry to interrupt. Is there a communication issue then, just in terms of how, with things that have already taken place, and the reporting back to either the people that have been involved in this work, those initial groups, or the community, is there a lack of communication so people understand?
I think that comes down to the lack of understanding of what our MAPI is and what it has become in the last 4 years. Okay. In the beginning, I think there was a misunderstanding about what they were going to do with all this information that they were compiling from people living in poverty. And at this point, there seems to be a lack of accountability in making those things happen. Our MAPI has gathered all this information. They have awesome recommendations. They have all this, data and information from people living in poverty. Now, who is going to pick that up and carry it forward? Now, our MAPI would say it's the jobs of nonprofits and our city government and, our state government and funders and private entities. But I think that's where the breakdown is in communication of who's supposed to be responsible for carrying the torch forward.
Got it. So do we have anything in place today that we didn't have before this initiative even began, that we can say this is something that's happening because of the work that's been done so far?